Alright, so I'm going to be responding to Daniel's claim that politicians are heavily biased, not on constituents, but the sponsors who donate to their campaign. His secondary claims were that gerrymandering is the source of power and is controlled by special interests, the public is largely detached from their political representatives, and that money is the greatest influence on politicians. So let's go back to that first claim about gerrymandering. One of the main problems with pretty much all of these claims is that there's too little evidence. Especially for this claim. There's literally no evidence or sources to back up this claim. That might be because the concept is well known, but there's also no claim or reasoning showing that special interests play a role in this process. In fact, special interests aren't even mentioned again after that initial claim is made. So it ends up just being just an argument about how gerrymandering is a problem in the government. And that's definitely true, but it is, from what I can see, it's an issue more of power than money. So Julian Zelizer wrote an article in the Washington Post talking about a book that was written about gerrymandering, and he says about it, although his argument might not be as sexy as talking about how money corrupts politics, the success of Republican legislators and governors at redrawing congressional districts is the reason, he says, House Republican incumbents have increased their power. So this guy's a political historian. He recognizes that gerrymandering and money in politics are two completely different issues, so that kind of destroys the argument a little bit. His secondary claim is that the public is largely detached from their political representatives. And we kind of all saw this because he asked everybody if they could name our new senator in California, and a lot of us could not. He also cited a University of Pennsylvania study, but both of these examples are pretty limited because they survey a very small age group. Obviously, this class is a pretty small age group. And the survey that was taken in the University of Pennsylvania only surveyed people aged 18 to 34. It also doesn't take into account the strength of political affiliation, and it also doesn't take into account how involved these people are in politics, which both would affect those numbers. It is true, though, that people are detached and uneducated from the government a lot of the time, but it's also not strongly connected to the proposition that money would lead to bias. It seems to imply, though, that because constituents are detached from representatives, it means that the representatives are also detached from the constituents, which doesn't really follow, and it's not supported. Another thing about this is that voters may not know the names of the people that are representing them, but they probably still voted for somebody based on their views, not based on who the person is. So when you vote, you get the little booklet or pamphlet, and it describes the candidates and what they stand for. For example, Kamala Harris is one of those senators that he asked us to name. And in her little description in the ballot, it says that she stands for, it says that she is wanting to have better preschools, more affordable childcare, she wants to create jobs, and she wants to make college more affordable. So if you agreed with those beliefs, you might have voted for her and then maybe forgotten her name because that's not as important of an issue. And then his final claim is that money is the greatest influence on politicians. And his main evidence for that was the C-SPAN video. While the speakers in that video did all have big energy companies as top contributors, that was one of his arguments, that doesn't mean that whenever a company donates to a politician, that will automatically influence their decisions. He got the information of the top contributors from opensecrets.org. So I looked at Kamala Harris's top contributors, and they're Time Warner and 20th Century Fox. Those are the top two. I don't think she's using her TV and movie preferences to make decisions as a senator. So that kind of destroys that argument a little bit. It's also never established or proven that donations are the direct cause of bias. It just shows that the money and actions are related. The more likely scenario is that companies support someone who will support them or give them some kind of advantage. So imagine you're a big energy company, like a big oil or big gas company. You could give your money to someone like Steve Stockman, who has doubts about climate change and the effect that's going to have. And he might do things for you he might do things for you in the government that will give you an advantage. Whereas you could also support Kamala Harris, but in her little description there, it says she prosecuted polluters and big oil companies when she was a district attorney, and she also wants to lead the fight against climate change. So the point here is you wouldn't give money to someone who would then use that money to screw you over. So that's more the reason that oil companies are supporting people like Steve Stockman and Larry Bouchon, or however you say his name. So in conclusion, The advocate failed to adequately prove that politicians are heavily biased, not on constituents, but the sponsors who donate to their campaign. Thank you.
All right, structurally everything is fine. On the gerrymandering argument, I think that you've got a lot of good presses on this particular point. There's one piece of testimony that suggests that the effectiveness of the political parties at gerrymandering has led to their successes in Congress, but there, like you said, there doesn't seem to be any relationship to political interests or special interests that are going on there. This just is the result of effective politics as opposed to the influence of money or power that's going on there. One thing that I do think that people sometimes need to think about on issues when like the subject of gerrymandering comes up is that gerrymandering is often done for not just political reasons but for social reasons as well. They want to carve out and make sure that people get a particular representation or there's an opportunity for representation. We've had a number of redistricting kinds of lawsuits that suggest that somebody, like a particular group is being screwed out by the gerrymander that's being taken place, and courts have intervened if they thought that there was a violation of the civil rights of a particular group. So it just seems like you've got a narrow argument on this, and maybe a little bit broader take on it would be helpful. On the idea of the public being detached, I thought that was an okay argument. Obviously they voted for someone. I do think the response from if we were having a third speech on this issue would be, yeah, the ones who bothered to vote, but a substantial proportion didn't even bother to vote. And I think there's an argument here that addresses those points. But remember, the advocate's position was that this is, special interest bias that's going on, that it's, as opposed to, the influence of the public. The public is ultimately the decision maker in these situations, and if special interest is shown, what restrictions are there, for example, on special interest contributions? What is required to reveal by politicians who accept donations in this particular situation? I think that's all stuff that would be really helpful. On the third point, I think you've got a very reasonable argument here. This is all refutation based on the reasoning that's being used here. Why is it that special interest groups donate to particular candidates? I like the idea that Kamala Harris is getting money from Time Warner and 20th Century Fox, but it doesn't appear that any of the issues that she was talking about in the campaign are directly affected by those particular points. Again, that's one of those things where maybe if we had more time and energy to get into it, we would discover that there are, in fact, some influences there. But that's one way of measuring it. The top two contributors didn't seem to have any special interest agenda that's going on there. The other argument is that I think a very good reasoning challenge. Why do people donate to? In other words, it's not so much that special interest finds people to donate to that they can influence. It's that they find people who share their view to donate to. And I think that that's a very reasonable challenge. I think some examples of that would be helpful, but we don't really have many of those sorts of things. Well, you kind of have the example of the climate guy and the other folks, why they wouldn't be donating to Kamala Harris, but they might donate to somebody who supports their position on those beliefs. Okay.